Hello, conference, and thank you for that very warm welcome. Can I say, first of all, Brynhon, and good afternoon. Or as they say in Fraserburgh, where I live, fit like. I'm sure none of you know me. Seamus Logan's my name. Thank you for that introduction. You stole my thunder. Yes, my claim to fame is that I took down the leader of the Tory party in Scotland in July. So people have been saying to me this morning, how are you feeling? How are you feeling? Well, I have to say I'm so honoured to be invited to speak to your conference. It's a big deal for me. But I do feel a bit like, you know that famous Morecambe and Wise sketch with Andre Previn? I've got all the right words, but not necessarily in the right order. Maybe some of your Father Ted fans? So you know that episode where Ted's standing outside Mass afterwards and this parishioner comes out and he says to him, "Father, what the hell was that sermon about?" You may be saying that after I've spoken, but anyway. So before beginning, I'd like to say, diolch, it's a privilege to be here to address you. What are my connections to Wales? I'd love to say they are as distinguished as St. Patrick, who may have been Welsh, but alas, no. But as a boy, I became a supporter of Cardiff City FC. In the days of John Toshak, Brian Clark, Bobby Woodruff, Gil Rees, Phil Dwyer, and many, many more stars that I idolised in my youth. Only a couple of weeks ago, sadly, my near neighbour in Fraserburgh in Aberdeenshire, a man called Brian Newlands, passed away. Brian was a talented footballer who played for Cardiff City alongside the great John Toshak. So what a small world it truly is. For someone born in Ireland representing a Scottish seat in the House of Commons in London, and now speaking at a party conference in Wales, this is quite a peculiar journey. But the UK is, I'm sure you would agree, by its very conception, peculiar. While the general election last year was a disappointing night for the SNP in Scotland, it was heartening to see Plaid Cymru achieve their best ever general election result in terms of vote share, and I congratulate you, well done. That result, I believe, is directly linked to the dedication by Plaid members and the party's vision for a better Wales, appealing to voters against the Westminster status quo. Now, conference, I'd also like to pay tribute to the tireless work done by Plaid MPs in Westminster, Liz Saville-Roberts, Ben Lake, Ann Davis, and Cliona Smitty. Give them a round of applause, because I can tell you, they are passionate defenders of Wales and Westminster and an endless source of inspiration to me and to my SNP colleagues. While Westminster can be a lonely place to pro-independence parties, Plaid MPs certainly make it less lonely and certainly more lively. Cliona will recall how her fantastic DM boots inspired me to search for a similar pair for my wife last Christmas. Alas, I couldn't find any, so watch your boots, Cliona, I may nick them. As DEFRA spokesperson for the SNP, I've spoken in many debates against Labour's family farm tax, with Ann Davis also speaking out very well. It's a shame they don't listen to us about how disastrous this policy is to rural communities and to our economic security and our food security. Maybe it's because of our accents, I don't know. But conference, while our parties represent different countries, we share a tremendous amount in common. We are the parties that stand up for Wales and for Scotland, respectively. Our cooperation and our life experience is our strength. Plaid under Chrian have been absolutely incredible, leading the charge against Labour in the Senedd, but also working together constructively in the past. Devolution does not allow for the ability to dismiss other parties the way Westminster often does. This has been the SNP experience in Holyrood also. Another key difference between our parties and others is that we want to reverse the disastrous damage Brexit has inflicted on our countries. While other UK parties are perfectly happy, it seems, with Brexit Britain, we know the economic harm that it has caused and will continue to cause for generations to come. It means less opportunities for people in our countries and significant barriers to trade with our closest trading partners. The gaps caused by Brexit are even more apparent when we consider the increase in defence spending in Europe now required. Starmer, claiming to act as a bridge between Europe and America, risks putting the UK at the whims of Trump and his America First foreign policy. Now, while I was not an MP at the time, I remember our parties working together to try and bring an immediate ceasefire in Gaza when that horrific and harrowing violence erupted 2 years ago. And my God, this last few days have been horrific. Our work with you in the Middle East has put pressure on the UK government in the most difficult of global situations, and long may it continue. Our parties will always uphold human rights and international law and seek to protect the most vulnerable around the world. Conference, we know that Westminster doesn't work in our interests. It's slow-moving, it's ancient and anachronistic in so many ways, and it's indifferent to the real change that people want and need in their lives. Our parties offer an alternative, a real alternative to the Westminster status quo. Since the SNP came into government in 2007, we have delivered for Scotland. Through devolution and political will, we have delivered world-leading policies that have put the most vulnerable first, that help our young people and our older people, and we have invested in our public services, all the while mitigating against the worst of Westminster's policies. Children born in Scotland and their parents benefit from a baby box full of essentials, giving every child an equal start in life. Children born, if a family is in poverty, they are supported by the Scottish Child Payment, a payment of £25 per week for every child. Conference, for families on the lowest incomes facing the most severe difficulties while raising a child, it is truly a game changer. Indeed, Scotland is the only part of the UK predicted to see a reduction in child poverty by 2029, according to research by the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. That same young person can then benefit from free bus travel to get to school, college, university, or to their first job. And getting our young people moving and encouraging usage of public transport comes with one fell swoop. If they decide to go on to university, they will not pay a penny in tuition fees. And we all remember the broken promises of the Liberal Democrats when it came to tuition fees. University in Scotland is not just free to our young people, it's valuable as well. We boast some of the oldest and some of the best universities in the world. And I'm very happy to say, so does Wales. Taxpayers in Scotland will, on average, benefit from paying less in income tax than those in England. Now, let me say that again, in case people tell you that people pay more tax in Scotland. A majority of taxpayers in Scotland pay less than their counterparts in England, and as a result, we are seeing an increase in the numbers of taxpayers in every single tax band. If people become ill in Scotland, they'll receive free prescriptions. If they become worse and have to go to hospital, they will be seen by the most valued NHS staff in the UK. Last year, our NHS workers were awarded the best pay award package in the UK because it was the right thing to do. And when people grow old in Scotland, they will receive free personal care. And from this winter, every pensioner household in Scotland will receive a winter fuel payment, in stark contrast to actions taken in London. Conference, the SNP Scottish Government have been delivering for Scotland since 2007, and we will continue to do so with the support of the people. At a time when the UK Government is planning cuts to benefits, the Scottish Government have just this month announced that all devolved benefits will increase by 1.7%. Conference, that is the difference between the values of our parties and the parties of Westminster. While in government, we haven't been immune to Westminster cuts. Indeed, we have often had to allocate money just to mitigate Westminster policies. Even now, we still have to do this. While the Chancellor cites the poor financial situation she inherited from the Conservatives for her brutal cuts, the SNP have been dealing with a poor financial situation in Scotland since coming into power. We came to power right before the 2008 financial crash. We governed throughout 14 years of Tory austerity, suffered the consequences of Brexit, and now we're facing even more cuts and disastrous policies from Labour. A poor financial situation is not an excuse to not prioritise the most vulnerable in society, to not be ambitious, to not do the right thing. Politics is about a choice. It always has been. The SNP has chosen and will always choose to stand up for people living in Scotland, and we will work every single day to make Scotland the best place to grow up in, the best place to work, and the best place to grow old in as well. And I'm sure you share that ambition for Wales also. While devolution is not the limit of our ambition for our respective countries, it can make a profound difference, but only when a party that puts its people first are in charge. We've seen this in Scotland, and I'm sure we will see it soon in Wales with a future Plaid government. No pressure conference. We know what works best. Decisions affecting Scotland should be made in Scotland. Decisions affecting Wales should be made in Wales. Conference, this is not a controversial statement. We have a vision for the future, one where people don't have to rely on food banks, where they don't have a government that shrugs its shoulders to the worst instances of poverty and constantly grumbles and mumbles something about a 22 billion black hole. I can't count the number of times I've heard that in the chamber. People know the Westminster parties do not offer a vision for the future like we do. Our vision doesn't have London at the centre. It has people from Scotland and Wales making their own decisions about the future that they want. Our parties offer hope. They offer change to the broken London-Westminster status quo that offers little for Scotland or Wales. The status quo deprives our countries of their autonomy. It takes our resources and our taxes and hands back money, pocket money, less than we should have based on our needs. Just last autumn, we in Scotland were told to be grateful. We should be grateful for the UK government's budget that gave us national insurance rises of 550 million, and then expect us to be thankful for 300 million to mitigate their own policy. We may have a new party in the UK government, but Scotland and Wales are still experiencing chronic failures from decisions made in Westminster. I was incensed to read that Labour have no plans to devolve the Crown Estate to Wales, something that has been enjoyed by Scotland since devolution in 1999. I believe it was the Welsh Secretary who said that it would put jobs at risk. So much for the party of devolution. Devolution is all about working together. Imagine my shock when Scottish Labour abstained on voting on the Scottish budget, a budget to deliver better public services, end the two-child cap and benefits, introduce a Scottish winter fuel payment, and they abstained after denouncing it so strongly and refusing to engage with my SNP colleagues in Holyrood. It reminds me of a certain Welsh Tory leader who couldn't be bothered turning up to a vote against a Welsh Labour budget a few months ago, as far as I remember. My short time in Westminster has been enlightening. A few other words I could use, but I'll just leave it at that. It's a deeply outdated place. It seems out of touch with the concerns faced by most people on a daily basis across these islands. Farmers, fishers, young people, older people, people in benefits, employers, asylum seekers and refugees, WASPy women, energy bill payers, and the list goes on. 2026 represents a huge opportunity for pro-independence parties, such as Plaid and the SNP, to win big and deliver for communities in our countries. The conference, I've tried to set out what the SNP stand for, but this is a question I often ask myself. What do the other big parties stand for? What do they actually stand for? For Labour, it's not the list I just mentioned. I'm old enough to remember a Labour Party that used to stand up for pensioners, for people on benefits, for people struggling with the cost of living, such as energy bills. I honestly struggle to see the difference between this Labour Party and the Tories. I just cannot see the difference. They've scrapped universal winter fuel payments. They've introduced national insurance charges on GPs, care homes, charities, hospices like Marie Curie that I saw in the arena today. A GB energy company that doesn't actually generate electricity. Never mind the backtracking on how many jobs will be in Aberdeen, and a chief executive officer based in Manchester. A department for work and pensions that doesn't seem to support those in work or in receipt of a pension. See, I remember Keir Starmer's slogan when he was standing for Labour leader in 2020, it was, and I quote, "Keir Starmer, another future is possible." He just never seemed to mention that it would be a worse future. I'd like to take a moment to remember some of the key pledges he made back in 2020 when he was seeking to become the leader. He pledged, and I just want to remind you, he pledged to end the cruel universal credit sanctions regime, to increase income tax on top earners and corporations, to abolish tuition fees, to put human rights at the heart of foreign policy, to defend free movement as we left the European Union, an immigration system based on compassion and dignity, work with the trade unions to stand up for working people, redistribute power, wealth and opportunity away from Whitehall, a federal system to fully devolve more powers, abolishing the House of Lords and replacing it with an elected chamber in the regions and nations. Well, how times have changed, and Keir seems to have forgotten them all. But since winning the general election in 2024, Labour had genuinely surprised me. I never thought I would see a winning party with such a huge majority turn so bad so quickly. Of course, maybe Welsh colleagues in Plaid could have predicted this for me following Vaughan Gething's short tenure as Labour's First Minister. Now, turning to the Conservatives, under Kemi Badenoch, they are in utter free fall, clinging desperately for attention against reform and proudly proclaiming that she does not plan on having any policies for years. We will see if she remains as leader by the time she has these bold ideas. Or perhaps her bold idea will be to stand down. When in government, the Conservatives treated Scotland and Wales with such disdain and a total lack of respect. We were not properly consulted on the Internal Market Act, COVID-19 planning, or how Brexit would impact on us. Instead, the Tories focused on any piece of legislation that came to mind or was the flavour of the month. Who could forget Boris Johnson's proposals for a bridge across the Irish Sea? But to be honest with you, I would just love to forget Boris Johnson. But the rise of reform is worrying. Remember, certainly in my constituency and other parts of Scotland, almost 40% of the electorate didn't turn out to vote. And we could be looking at a problem if reform tap into those disillusioned voters. But they represent a return to the worst aspects of Thatcherism, now on steroids. Weakening our NHS, cutting key public services, reversing net zero policies that we need to address the climate emergency. More disturbingly, they are slow to support Ukraine, quick to praise Trump, no matter the consequences to the ongoing Russian illegal invasion of Ukraine. Now, speaking of President Trump, I was bewildered when I found out that Keir Starmer had invited the man who treated Zelensky with such contempt to an unprecedented second state visit to the UK. I will say now, Conference, the Prime Minister should not have issued that invite in light of how President Zelensky was treated by Trump and Vance just the next day. I'm glad, in fact, I'm proud that our parties stand together resolutely against reform and their dangerous policies. Conference, we know that when people are voting for reform, they aren't voting for true reform. They're voting for Farage, for what I call Little Englander politics. They hanker for the good old colonial days. Farage will not deliver the change that people need. He and his fellow travellers will instead make the UK worse off. Therefore, only our parties can deliver for our nations. We have seen what the Conservatives have done, what Labour are doing, and what reform will do if they get in. We say no to all of that, and yes to policies that deliver for the poorest in society, invest in our key public services, and that sees our nations take their place on the global stage as sovereign European nations. Conference 2026 will be the key test for our party and for our respective independence movements. But I believe we can rise to that challenge. Following next year's elections, I look forward to seeing an SNP-led Scottish government and a Plaid-led Welsh government working together to improve the lives of our people. We have a great deal to learn from each other, and we need to stand together more than ever. Conference, you have the determination, the energy, and a vision for Wales that I know will resonate with voters up and down the country. Let's win these elections to improve our countries, our communities, and lead our nations to take our place on the world stage. May the cooperation between our parties long continue. I would like to thank you again for having me here to this wonderful event. Diolch. Thank you.